What's up, everybody? In a change of pace this week, I'm your quote-unquote host, Chris Manning, here for Octagon Control with my man, Nikolai Gionti. Nikolai, how does this role reversal feel for you right now? And also, how are you doing today?
Well, the role reversal is a little weird. I don't have any controls in front of me, which is definitely a change. But I'm doing pretty good. I'm 3 weeks out, like 17 days out of fight camp. I'm only like 13 pounds over. I'm eating dried mango slices, which are pretty darn good. And I get to enjoy fights. And allegedly, I have a fight or an opponent. So, this is opponent number 9 so far in the 2 fights, but allegedly he's agreed. So, let's hope that happens.
Yeah, let's go. I had dried papaya today, which was interesting.
I'm all for the dried fruit. If you find healthy dried fruit, stuff's legit.
Banana
dried
chips.
Banana chips.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Put them in oatmeal with peanut butter.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah.
But we did have some outstanding fights last week.
Yeah, which, you know what, like, here I want to ask you a question that I saw posted on Twitter today. Which fight did you prefer, just from an aesthetic standpoint? Chris Weidman versus Lyoto Machida or Robbie Lawler versus Matt Brown? I preferred Weidman Machida. I think that's the far better fight.
You know, I have to agree with you. Robbie Lawler, Matt Brown is one of those fights that sort of makes us lick our chops and as fans. It's a fight that really excites us because it throws caution to the wind. But Chris and Lyoto Machida is almost a better of what we saw in Cub Swanson and Jeremy Stevens. These guys that have great stand-up, they're able to slip, dodge punches, throw beautiful techniques. That's what I enjoy to see. You know, it might not get a finish. We might not, have as much blood as we saw on Lawler or now, or we might not have that guy that gets rough with a body shot. But it's such a much better technique, and that's not taking away from Robbie Lawler, but Matt Brown's going to make it ugly. That's how he wins fights. He makes it ugly. The Weidman, just seeing a guy that's improved that much, and Machida, a guy with such rare technique as opposed to a lot of guys with that karate background and the sumo style that he also uses for his takedown defense. That's something I enjoy a lot more.
Yeah, I agree. No, I just think like the whole fight was just with Weidman and with Lawler and Brown. Let's start there. I felt really Lawler was in control most of that fight. Like I felt he very much just controlled what was going on, just controlled the pacing, controlled pretty much the whole fight. And Weidman and Machida. Weidman was dominant early, but Machida came roaring back in that fight. And it was just a nail-biter down to the finish. So Weidman really kind of won it late in the 5th. But again, yeah, you're cherry-picking if you're just kind of trying to pick between those two. It's hard to pick between those two. But looking back at this Fox card, overall pretty decent card, I would say. Like a pretty good main card, pretty good main event. Obviously, some interesting results during, on that main card. But Nikolai, before we kind of just break down some of the major fights here, besides the Robbie Lawler, who obviously gets a title shot, who is your big winner coming out of UFC on Fox 12?
It's got to be my man crush. It's got to be Dennis Bermudez. It's either him or Jorge Masvidal, in my opinion. But Bermudez he was a top 12 guy to begin this fight. And he went against Clay Guida, who maybe undeservedly was number 7 in the division. But Bermudez is a guy that we're so used to seeing these brawls and in these close split decision controversial fights. It was just that Siler fight and the Jimmy Hedges fight where he was starting to come into his own. But if you look at how well Bermudez did on Saturday compared to Bermudez Matt Grice, Dennis Bermudez would beat the hell out of Dennis Bermudez 14 months ago or however long ago that was. Bermudez is a whole different animal now. He might not beat any of these top 5 guys, but he certainly deserves the top 10, top 5 guy. And in my opinion, you're either looking at a defense or another person around that area. But the issue is a lot of those are filled. If Seaver coming back from his suspension, I think that's a name that could make sense. That's a name that it's a big name for him. But I like the idea of Nikolai's coming up.
I do too. And I'm gonna go a little the guy who fought in the co-main event, and I think Anthony Johnson here's the big winner. Like that dude is like, it's crazy to say that he's more powerful at 205 than he was at 170, and he was wrecking dudes at 170, and also like kind of when even at heavyweight he has power, but at 205 he's a legit contender. You know, he beat Phil Davis. You absolutely just destroyed Little Nog. You know, there's a lot of different ways you could go with him, but I think he's clearly a contender at this point. I don't like the idea of him and Gustafsson, so I think Gustafsson should just to get his title shot depending on the timing. But I like the winner of him versus the winner of OSP and Ryan Bader. I think that makes a lot of sense to give a little preview for matchmaking. But also, I'll give a tip to another lightweight. You mentioned Jorge Masvidal. Bobby Green. Like, maybe he didn't deserve to win that fight. I think I scored it for Bobby Green, 29-20, but you could fully score for Thompson. It wouldn't be a problem. But big emotional win for him. He's going to be in line for big fights next. If Nate Diaz ever comes back, I'd love to see Bobby Green and Nate Diaz. That fight to me just screams awesome.
I believe they just announced Bobby Green.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well yeah. So.
Which is going to be a fun fight.
Yeah. Not really the step up if I'm Bobby Green. Like, I know he just wants to entertain the fans, and it's on a really, really big card with John Jones, with Conor McGregor and Poirier. That's like, and you know, the return of, there's a lot of really big fights in that card. I mean, I'm just looking at, I can't remember the whole main card, but that card, just remember thinking, holy crap, that card is like UFC 100 type stacked. It's not the step up you want. I think you would hope for him. Like, Cerrone would have made sense, but maybe they have something lined up for Cerrone, because to me that would have made the most sense. With no Habib.
I agree.
With no Habib, Cerrone's the top-ish guy without an opponent. One of those guys versus Cerrone would have made a lot of sense to me.
And how are we going to get Cerrone his 6 fights this year if we don't give him a guy like Bobby Green who just won? You know, Cerrone wants to fight 6 times, and we all kind of want to see him fight. You know, Cerrone's one of those dudes that really gets us excited.
Yeah.
But between those two guys, sort of a dark horse, in my opinion, that looked really good, especially coming off how he began his UFC career. Patrick Cummins.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he 30-24 Kyle Kingsbury. The last time we saw that was Nate Quarry and Caleb Starnes, when Nate Quarry was doing the running man to catch Caleb Starnes. This was a legit beating. And Kyle Kingsbury has had some tough losses recently, injuries recently, just retired, but Kingsbury's a gamer nonetheless, and that was a tough fight for Cummins. You know, a big step up, and Cummins dominated that fight. This guy's showing why he got signed to the UFC at 4-0. He's looking better and better each fight. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. He's going to take some time to develop, but that's a guy you should watch at 205. Like, he's one of the, 205 is a great division at the top, but it's lacking a real developmental prospect. And all joking aside, he really, really has a chance to kind of rebuild himself coming off a win. Like, he beats a guy like Kyle Kingsbury. Doesn't deserve anyone top 10, probably maybe not top 15, top 20, but a step up, he can wrestle and he can strike. I mean, it's just, you fight Daniel Cormier, and at that stage you're just so green. I don't know, that's just a lot. But who's your biggest loser coming out of this weekend? There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of them at the top. Like, I think there's 3 guys where you kind of are like, okay, that's tough for you to come back from this.
If we're talking biggest loser of the week, it's Matt Brown. But biggest loser solely from a fight, I have to go Clay Guida. You know, this is a guy that had 2 good fights. He had a very controversial first win at 145. He gets knocked out by Mendes. First time he's been finished. He loses to Bermudez and was dominated the entire time. Just looked slow. You know, this is a guy at 145 seemed smart when we heard it first, but maybe that style is better for 155. And maybe that's a weight class he needs to go back to if he's going to contend. You know, there's a point where Clay Guida was fighting Benson Henderson in a number 1 contender spot. You know, can he move up to a weight class and get back to that
He beat Anthony Pettis. I mean, he's the guy in the UFC that beat Anthony Pettis. He's one of 2 men ever to beat Anthony Pettis, and they are Clay Guida and Bart Palashevsky.
Weirdest. You and I were discussing this.
Yeah, like there's...
Really weird loss.
We didn't even talk about Anthony Pettis losing to those 2, and like Clay Guida's not super weird considering the style, but Bart Palashevsky's super weird to me that Anthony Pettis lost to Bart Palashevsky. Maybe WEC it makes sense, like I guess, but that's weird. It's super weird.
It doesn't mean a big loser for the week. You know, this is a guy that has not been consistent since dropping a weight class in something that seems like it might be his natural weight class. I just think his style is so on the awkwardness and the speed that he utilizes in that gritty, grinded out style. But when you're going against guys who are faster than you, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I just think like there's two things for me. I think 145 is a mistake. It looks like it takes a little bit out of his style. Like he just can't. Like he might be bigger at 145, and he was like just like a physically stronger guy. But part of what made him so effective at 155 was that he was quicker and could get inside and get takedowns. When he's fighting Chad Mendes, he can't do that. When he's fighting Bermudez, he's not strong enough to pick him up and negate the advantage. He can beat Kawajiris, and he can beat, like lower level guys, but he's gonna get wrecked by the young bulls who can just whip him around. And I was gonna say Guida as well, but I'm also gonna say Josh Thompson. I mean, this doesn't like totally. It doesn't. Little Nog, I guess it's just like I don't know what else I was expecting, so I'm like okay. Like, you could still do him and Dan Henderson, and I'd be totally down for that. Like, that's a cool fight to do for both those guys at this stage. But with Josh Thompson, he's 35. He beats, it seems like forever ago that he beat Nate Diaz, was going to be in line for a shot. Now he did, everything that's happened, like, even if he would have won this fight, he's probably got to take another fight while Gil and Anthony don't fight until December-ish. Like, December 6th, what I've kind of read, like...
And to jump in, the worst part about this is that Ben Henderson fight, I think a lot of people won. And if he won that fight, you could argue that he could have either gotten a title shot, or he wouldn't have had to take a very risky fight like this against a guy at Bobby who's always a game fighter, and take this risk of losing. He could be in a number one contender spot sitting pretty. Instead, he has to take a Bobby Green fight on short notice.
Yeah, I mean, he was supposed to have Michael Johnson, which, like, at least Michael Johnson, was a little bit higher ranked than Bobby Green. Like, I mean, but it's not like either fight was, like, huge. Like, he's at that point in their career where he realistically should have, like, ideally would have been, like, Cerrone would have made a ton of sense. But obviously Miller. Melendez, I mean, if they had in their history, would have made a ton of sense. Like Pettis, like Benson, like he already fought Benson, but like he needs to be in that. He needed to be in that stratosphere, I think. And you obviously got to play the dice, but you play you're given, but it's tough. Yeah, I mean but it's not like he's out of the title picture forever, but it's not like I'm gonna be on his bandwagon for him to make another title run at 155. It's just such a deep division. But looking at the main event, before we talk about some of the major news that has happened in the past week, Matt Brown and Robbie Lawler. We'll start with Matt Brown. What do you think is next for him? I think it's clear what his ceiling is at 170, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, and in the right circumstance, he could still break through. But he probably still deserves a top 10 guy. Nick Diaz, to me, would have made a ton of sense. But obviously Nick Diaz is going to be fighting another guy who we'll talk about in a little bit. But what do you do with Matt Brown next?
Well, first off, this is a hell of a run by Matt Brown.
Oh yeah, you have to give him credit.
It was incredible. He just ran up against a guy that was better at the style that he needs to employ. I think there are a few fights since. The one fight that I like to see. There's two fights, really. I think you can give him Jake Ellenberger, and that makes sense. The other fight that can make sense, Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit's coming off the loss to Tyron Woodley, and he hurt his knee. But that's a fight that was originally scheduled. Carlos Condit, for once, won't have to worry about a guy trying to take him down. And Condit's always a fun fighter. That would be a brawl. That's a fun fight for both Matt Brown and Carlos Condit. And it's one that keeps them relevant in the division. You could also, I'm not sure what's going on with Tarek Safdie at the moment, but I think that's a fight that you can schedule also.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another name out there. I'm also going to throw out Hector Lombard. Like, I know coming up a win and a loss with Lombard got hurt. So you have Woodley fighting Dong Yun Kim. Maybe the loser of that fight too. I mean, there's a lot of options for Matt Brown. I don't think there's like a natural one guy for him, but we obviously know who Robbie Lawler is going to fight. He's going to rematch Johnny Hendricks. And depending on when the fight takes place, which I think it'll be before Johnny Hendricks will hit the full year. It'll be like probably in January is what I'm going to guess. Like January, maybe early February. I think Lawler's going to be the one thing that'll be working in his favor more than anything. Like Hendricks is going to be healthy, but he's not going to have fought in so long. Lawler's going to got some serious work in that past year, and he's going to have time to recover from that work while also having those reps in his back pocket. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You know, Lawler's sort of this guy that has come into the UFC at 170, just looked incredible. And I think for a little bit, you and I probably both thought it was a fluke.
I definitely did.
You beat Bobby Holker, that's great. You knock out Josh Koscheck, that's great. But no one really thought much of him. And then, you know, Rory McDonald, he hangs close with Johnny Hendricks. Now you're like, holy crap, this guy's a legit force in the division.
The 10 pounds, the 15 pounds, excuse me, is like a big deal for him. Like he realistically looks like, while he can fight at 185, he's so much better suited for 170 pounds. Like he should be at 170 pounds. Like without question.
Exactly.
Like he should.
And this was his legit weight class.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he makes the cut. Like he looks good. You know, like, but I can't wait for Hendricks Lawler too. I think that the first fight was great. I still give the edge to Hendricks just because of the wrestling, because of he's a little quicker, I think. And if you know the torn bicep affect him as much as he says, like, you know, he gets two hands going in that fight, then he clearly looks good. But that layoff definitely worries me. But Lawler, depending on how things shake out the rest of the year, could be one of my early fit. Like is right now, I think if I had to pick a fighter of the year right now, Robbie Lawler would be my fighter of the year. Like 2 big wins. I can't think of anyone else with a better resume. Benson honestly could get there, which is kind of crazy to say, but like he just kept going to run. Like Weidman definitely could be there. Jones obviously, but right now, like Lawler's one of my favorites for fighter of the year, and TJ Dillashaw too if he beats Henan Barrow again.
Yeah, that'd be incredible if Dillashaw beats Henan
Barrow. So before we kind of wrap up on this card, what are some matches you would make for some of the guys on the card? And we're obviously the undercard's kind of tough to predict. So we'll stick with the upper levels.
You know, obviously, like I said, I love Bermudez and Nikolai. I think that's an outstanding matchup. Johnson, OSP, winner, another outstanding matchup. There's a couple fights that you look at and you're not sure. Masvidal, Green, that's sort of tied up. You know, there's a lot of weird sort of matchups going on, and a lot of weird fights that can't be made. If I'm choosing one, I am going with Matt Brown, and just, you know, give me Carlos Condit. That's the one fight I want to make. Give me Carlos Condit. I think that's an outstanding matchup. I think Matt Brown deserves a little bit of time off. You know, he's been 2 fights in about a 2-month period. That's a relatively quick turnaround. I think that's a great matchup to make, though.
Yeah, I'd go there. I kind of want to know I don't know where to get what to do, but I just want to know who Bermudez fights next. He to me is an interesting guy, 170 or 145. Like I just don't know exactly where his ceiling is going to be. Like I want to know where he hits his wall. But again, I think Rumble OSP Bader is the one I want to see most. Like, it's a pretty winnable fight for Anthony Johnson, but he's a guy in the past who like loses his head. You know how weird is it going to be if we see Anthony Johnson potentially in like a title fight against John Jones, and you're going to look at his win loss record, and so looking back at his runs, he will have the last time. So he's on a currently overall, including World Series of Fighting, is on an 8-fight win streak. This is who he fought before he left the UFC after the Vitor thing and lost. This is who he beat in his last 5 UFC fights. At UFC 104, he beat Yuki Yoshida at 170 pounds. Literally decapitated him with a head kick. Not literally, but then he lost to Josh Koscheck. Think about that. He beat Dan Hardy.
That was the infamous eye poke incident.
Yep. Then he literally destroyed. He beat up Dan Hardy, and then he literally destroyed Charlie Brenneman, who's now a 155 pounder. And then he loses to Vitor, and then he beat some interesting guys, and like just a couple decent guys, Arlovsky mostly. And then he beats Phil Davis. He's just had maybe if you want to talk about weird career arcs, Anthony Johnson might have the weirdest.
But it's a guy that's matured, and I think that's the biggest thing you have to say about it. It's a guy that went from fighting at 170 pounds, cutting 50 pounds of weight, to a guy that his natural weight of 205. And he's still 6'3", I think, at 205. He's a massive 205er to begin with.
Yeah, he can fight a heavyweight.
Kept his power. He's let his technique come. This is a guy that's a solid wrestler, too. made Phil Davis look stupid. Anyone else that would have fought Phil Davis, who had been in the UFC at the time, would have been in a number one contender fight next. Anthony Johnson has this weird sort of career where he stepped up on short notice, dominates Phil Davis, goes down a step, did what everyone thought he would do against Nogueira, or at least what I thought he would do. And now we're sort of looking at, well, let's give him this sort of top 10, top 12 guy.
It's kind of you kind of gotta know if it's for real though. I think that's the thing. You know, like you gotta know, like, is this for real for him? Like, is he gonna keep his head on? Because in the past, like, losing to a guy like Ryan Bader would make a ton of sense for Anthony Johnson. Is that mostly because of the weight cut and just him? Has he figured it out at this point? Because if he has figured it out, super interested in seeing him fight John Jones. Like,
I think the other thing we have to look at that's really weird is you can't schedule him against Rashad Evans. Gustafsson deserves a title shot. Glover, there's no point in scheduling that.
Glover Phil Davis makes like a ton of sense to me.
It does, but you could risk losing Phil Davis as a contender. And, you know, maybe that's not as big a risk when you have Cormier and then Gustafsson both lined up for Jones, but...
I mean, he's coming off a loss. He's not really, to me, like a contender right now.
Right. I mean Rumble.
Yeah.
Or did we move on to Phil Davis and Glover?
Okay, yeah, well, you're talking about Phil Davis and Glover. Like,
okay.
I think, yeah, because I thought you meant, like, you lose Phil Davis, like, he's coming off the loss. Like,
no.
not.
I think he's kind of out of the way when it comes to contenders. You know,
yeah.
He really choked in that fight.
Yeah. So we'll see what they do with 205. Interesting, but there's a lot of news to break down this week, and that's kind of where we're gonna head next. Nikolai, do you want to finish with the Nick Diaz stuff, or do you want to start with the Nick Diaz stuff? I want you to make your call on this because I know you're gonna have some interesting thoughts on this. I just want to know what you want to do.
Let's start with it.
Okay. So the big news, obviously, that happened today is that we knew about a week ago. Nikolai and I have had some problems recording just due to our crazy schedules, but that'll get better in the coming weeks. Now that I'll have a little more time, hopefully. But Nick Diaz is back, and he's going to be fighting Anderson Silva on the UFC Super Bowl weekend card on January 31st. Going to headline at UFC 183. Obviously, this fight is going to be at 185 pounds. Just crazy, awesome fight. Like, I'm like, is it a super fight? I don't really care what you think of it like that or not. Like, I think this fight's awesome. I think it's kind of perfect for both guys. Like, I'm still interested in Nick Diaz at 170 pounds. I'd love to see him fight Lombard. I'd love to see him fight Matt Brown. I'd love to see him fight Condit again. I'd love to see him fight Lawler again. I'd love to see him fight Hendricks. Even there's all those guys I want to see him fight. But if he's not interested in doing that, and I remember when he left, Ariel Helwani pointed this out. He said he wasn't coming back unless it was for GSP, Anderson Silva, and he got a new contract, and he did it. So props to Nick Diaz, and I'm super excited about this fight. Like, the only fight that I'm more excited about that we know about right now probably is Jones and Cormier, because that fight's just going to be I can't even wait for that fight.
Yeah, I've obviously not spoken against Nick Diaz. I'm not a big fan, but this is a fight that truly makes sense. I don't agree with his methods of holding out. I don't agree with his logic. This is a guy that puts more value in himself and believes he's higher above than a lot of people, which I think is the issue. He believes they should pass to the front of the line every time. He got his pass once. He failed. He wants it again. But Anderson Silva grew some injury. Anderson Silva's not going to be really a title challenger for a little bit. Nick Diaz says he wants Anderson Silva. This is a fun fight as far as I'm concerned. It's a fun fight. It's a way for Nick Diaz to keep his name out there. It's a big enough name in Anderson Silva where it's something that will intrigue people. It's not as if we're putting Silva against, a Lorenz Larkin or something in a comeback fight. This is a fight that people will be interested to see. Is Anderson Silva back? Is his leg okay? And with Nick Diaz, it's, how good really is the guy? Or is he sort of a matchup-based fighter? If you look at Nick Diaz in the UFC, he beat BJ Penn, and then he lost to Carlos Condit and GSP. So really, where is Nick Diaz's value in the UFC? That's the big thing. But I do like this fight both ways. I think it's a very fun fight for each, and the timing makes sense also. It's a very good time fight. It helps us know the Anderson Silva timeline, and it's good to see where he's at also.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Like he definitely has a lot to prove in that, in a sense, like what he's going to do if he comes back. But from Anderson Silva's perspective, like pretty much like a really, really solid, like probably the best fight you could pick on the way coming back. Like he gets this fight, he doesn't have to fight someone that can like wrestle him. He's gonna fight someone who's gonna engage him. It's a big fight. Like it's a guy coming up from 170. This is a really, really good fight for Anderson Silva to come back to.
There's not a lot of risk in it, in my opinion. Silva could get dragged into the later rounds, but I don't think he has to worry about takedowns. He doesn't have to worry about anyone with, crazy Muay Thai. If Anderson Silva wanted a boxing match, this is the closest he'll get in the UFC.
Yeah. Early breakdown of this fight, Nikolai. Obviously, I think this fight is going to take place almost all the way on the feet. I don't see anyone shooting for a takedown in this fight. I think we're going to see some Diaz like antics, because I think Silva's really, depending on how much Silva moves, tries to get in his head. I think that's going to be so interesting. I think it's going to be very tense, but I think Anderson Silva ultimately wins this fight, and I think it's actually, depending on how I say this assuming that he really can plant and move on that leg. Like, I'm assuming that he actually can do that, which is obviously a big if considering how gruesome that leg injury was. I'm gonna say that Anderson Silva wins, and I think there's a really good chance that he could finish Nick Diaz.
I'm gonna agree with you. I think the big difference here, and it really is, this is solely based on Anderson Silva and his leg being 100%, but that kicking style is a big difference. And as great as Nick Diaz is with the boxing, he doesn't check kicks. That's not part of his game plan. I think Anderson Silva can chew up his legs and eventually end up going for a high kick or a snap kick that catches Nick Diaz. And I think that's what we're going to see. There's going to be Diaz antics. I don't think there's going to be as many Anderson Silva antics as we usually see. I have to go, I think this is either a third round finish if it's a co-main event, and if it's a 5-round fight.
This is a 5-round. This is going to headline the Super Bowl card.
Then I have to go with the 4th round TKO by Anderson Silva. This is early thoughts.
Yeah, we'll have to see how he looks, obviously. But that's the big news. Also interesting, again, just want to remind you, the UFC announced that via Sports Center, not Fox, Sports Center. So I want to say that that says a lot.
Weird. They signed a 7-fight deal or 7-year deal with Fox.
It just says a lot about Fox as a network. Like
it does. And you remember there was a time where Dana White wanted nothing to do with ESPN, and now he's taking over their Instagram and their Twitter, and he's making announcements from this specific ESPN.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. So we're looking ahead at some of the news from this past week. Obviously the first thing is that we're going to mention is, what I would say, I think the big thing is going to be Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier. We didn't even have a chance to talk about this, and this is a little bit old at this point, but love the fight. Apparently his knee's going to be okay. Like, you got to believe him when he says it. But love the fight. I think it's going to be Jones's biggest test in, potentially. And I want to just note something. I don't think, some people are saying it's going to be a pretty predictable fight. I've seen this. Based on that Jones beat Rashad. Personally, I don't think Rashad and Cormier, they're kind of similar, but they're very different. Like, Cormier is a much more explosive wrestler, not as clean of a counterboxer, and not as clean of a striker, but he's a lot better of a grappler, and I think he's probably a lot better in the clinch.
I think it's a lot stronger, but I think that's the big thing. Daniel Cormier, assuming that he is healthy, because I believe both you and I thought he had torn ACL.
Yeah, he said it was going to be an LCL, and he said he thought he was going to have surgery. He said it felt better. He's been doing rehab. The doctor said he didn't need it, so he's not going to have it.
But I don't think this fight's as predictable. become very predictable. It depends on how well Daniel Cormier is able to react to that reach, and I think he should be okay. He's got, Cain Velasquez there in his camp. That's a huge asset to have.
And he wants to train with Anderson Silva and also Lyoto Machida.
And those are two guys that can help. It's going to be tough to get used to that range. Even if you're working with Anderson Silva, tack on another 2 inches and about 7 inches in reach, and that's John Jones. But those are guys that can get used to that style. It could become very predictable. Cormier can't figure that distance out in the first couple rounds. We could see a lot of kicks, a lot of those knee strikes, those elbows, and it could be a bloodied up Daniel Cormier. But right now, with the grappling ability that Daniel Cormier has, and he's very good at closing the distance. He's been going against taller guys his entire career. I think this is a fight that's very intriguing, and I'm more interested in it than I am without Alexander Kukuts at the moment.
I mean, I'm interested in both equally, I think. To be honest with you, it's Gustafsson. The first fight was just so unreal. I have to see that rematch. That rematch to me has to happen. So for me, I'm pretty okay with. I'm very, very okay with either, but Cormier is just so interesting. I'm taking Jones still. I think pretty much. I think we're both gonna agree there, but I'm gonna take John Jones. But I can't wait. And looking at UFC 178, I can't say this enough. Nikolai and I always seem to end up talking about this, but I think this is the kind of thing that the UFC doesn't do enough. These cards, you're just over the lack of good cards. Looking at this card, here's the fights that we know so far. Jones versus Cormier is the headliner. You have McGregor and Poirier. Cruz makes his return against Mizugaki. Tim Kennedy is fighting Yoel Romero. Kat Zingano is fighting Amanda Nunes in what is probably a number 1 contender fight, depending on what goes on with Gina Carano. John Howard is fighting Brian Ebersol, and Cote is fighting Stephen Thompson. And there's also been all these rumors going around today of there's going to be a co-main event added to this card. I've even seen, and I don't know how reputable this is, and Steve Morocco from MMA Junkie shot this down, but that Eddie Alvarez could be on his way because he is technically a free agent and could be fighting Donald Cerrone on this card. And so now he's a Bellator fighter, and that was the case. That's a huge card, and either way, this card's already great. But and then
if Eddie Alvarez does have to work out, and that's a true fight, I think that says a lot about what we're going to see with Bellator. I think that says a lot about why Bjorn Rebney was kind of ousted there. They didn't have great fighter relations. That's something we can obviously talk more about later. But if you add Alvarez and Cerrone on this card, that's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, in that card, you already have some, unreal fights. Poirier McGregor to me is awesome. Great. Then you want to look at UFC 177, and yes, it has 2 title fights, but it's Dillashaw versus Barao, which I don't see Barao says he woke up in the locker room for that fight. That's an unnecessary rematch. Don't need to rehash that. Demetrius Johnson's going to literally wipe the floor with Chris Carazao. He is going to destroy him. I don't see how Chris Carazao, gets out of 3 rounds of that fight. I think Demetrius is going to finish him, early.
And there's a lot of fights, the order of these fights, at least if they're true. Henry Cejudo is one of these guys that he's got a lot of hype around him. He's someone that could make 125 a much more interesting division. And you're going to bury him on the Fight Pass prelims behind Ruan Potts and Anthony Hamilton and Ruslan Magomedov and Richard Odoms. Are you kidding me? That's absurd. Scott Jorgensen is a big name guy also that people know. To bury that doesn't make sense, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And Betch Kohea and Shayna Baszler is the 3rd fight on this card. It's just not. It's not a deep card from top to bottom. They really ignored 177 after the 166 or 176.
This card could have used Mousasi and Souza, and obviously that's going to headline a fight night in Connecticut. But comparatively, this is the top 6 fights for that Connecticut card in the Foxwoods. Mousasi Souza, Overeem Rothwell, Mintrion Lewis, Lauzon Chisea, Soriano Fili, Lent Oliveira. That's a better card than 173. I'm super interested in that card, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I won't criticize you for butchering Chiesa.
Did I? Okay, whatever. I'm rolling today.
But no, you're right. That's a much deeper card. Joe Lodon, or Lauzon, as a good old BJ Penn calls him. It's a fight. this is just a fight card overall that top to bottom is better. Even if you said, you know what, let's take Overeem and Rothwell and stick that on 177, or Lozon and Chiesa on 177. Those are two fights that would draw more than, and no offense to Betch Correia or Shayna Baszler, but that draws a lot more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. But, that's some of the major things. Nikolai, is there anything else that you think we need to discuss this week?
I don't think there's a ton. I think we've seen a lot of things that sort of are obvious. As usual, I think we have to shout out to TJ. He's back in America, actually living in California now.
Look at him. I'm jealous of him.
He was actually at the Bellator event last week, cornering Felipe Lins.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he was there. So huge shout out to him. Obviously, he allowed us to take this over. Huge shout out to Tommy Masano, who, other than running ULTMMA, and first off, if you enjoy prospect rankings for other sports, check that out because that's the MMA version of it. I personally love, and this isn't me kissing his ass, so to speak, but I love the idea of figuring out what fighters walk out to. And those articles weekly, or whenever there's an event on Sheerdog, are genius. I think a lot of people are more interested in that than a lot of people really think. And producing those weekly is just outstanding.
Sometimes I want to favorite those tweets when Tommy tweets at fighters because I just want him to I want to just be like, Tommy, I respect you because I can tell you I do a little bit of recruiting work for Hustle Belt, for basketball, and it's the most awkward thing in the world to tweet at someone and ask them hey, I need to ask you a question, and it's just really awkward.
And I love how formal it is. At Menace Bermudez, I am writing an article on your walkout music. What will you be walking out to Saturday?
And it's only in MMA where I have to be yeah, that's cool. I'll answer that. We're still early enough where there's some really good social media interaction.
There really are, and there's a couple interviews I want to talk to you about trying to get you and I off the show, but hopefully that comes up weekly. There is one interview I would like to talk. I'll sort of bring up on the air that I'm pretty sure will be game soon. I've been lucky enough to have a personal trainer who sort of specializes in unconventional training and is a big proponent of On It, which is a supplement company that I really use a lot, who is working with me for my fight in exchange for sponsorship. I think I'm going to try to get him on our show and talk about sort of MMA training, the difference in training those guys as compared to a usual person, but that should be fun. And then obviously we'll try to get a couple fighters soon.
Yeah, I am down to talk about that. We'll definitely talk off the air, but this has been Octagon Control this week. Shout out to Tommy Masano, who you can find on Twitter at ULTMMA. Hopefully his Phoenix Suns get Eric Bledsoe back. Thanks to DJ, obviously. And you can find Nikolai on Twitter at Nikolai_Gionti. He will be tweeting a lot in the lead up to his fight, and I'm really bummed. I'm going to try to be there. I have some stuff at school that I'm trying to get out of so I can make it up back to Ohio, Northern Ohio, because I'll be in Southern Ohio to OU, to watch him fight and kick some butt. But if not, he better find a way to get me a video. Unless he loses, then he just needs to lie to me. And
August 16th, Doylestown, Ohio. Opponent number 9, but it looks like we.
Where is Doylestown?
Somewhere around Akron. I don't know.
All right, we'll figure it out. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at CW. Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at CWM Rights. Shameless plug time. If you can find my work, because I'm in full freelancer mode. Backdraw Magazine, Hustle Belt, Fear the Sword, hopefully ULTMMA soon. I've been talking to Tommy about doing some writing there, and maybe a slightly bigger publication. The Classical and Belt Magazine, which I'll be shamelessly plugging the crap out of for a project I'll be working on for them about the Cleveland Rockers. Do you know who the Cleveland Rockers? What the Cleveland Rockers?
If you're high,
you know
Cleveland Rockers? You mean the WNBA team?
Yeah. What's up, buddy?
WNBA team?
Yeah.
Also, shameless plug on my end. If you're hiring recent college graduates, please check me out.
Nikolai has a degree from the Scripps School of Communication. He's got
I
a
like to get punched in the face for a living. It's a win-win. All right, I'll wrap it up for us. This is Octagon Control. I really enjoyed the switch. It was fun, and we will talk to you next week.
Boom.